So hello, welcome to today's webinar. My name's Lisa Dargan and I'm joined by one of your senior consultants, Chris Hayes. Hey Chris.
Morning everybody.
So today's subject is beyond ISO 27001, DORA and NIS 2. I will try really hard to say NIS and not NIST because I know people do get confused between the two. Today's webinar is quite interesting in that we were approached by DMV, who are one of our certification body partners, to say that they think it'd be really useful, particularly for a number of their clients, to understand what goes beyond 27001, what DORA and NIS 2 are, and how they relate to 27001. So welcome particularly to DMV clients as well. What we're going to do today, here's a very rough agenda. If you do have any questions, then please put them in. There's a chat box. Please raise your questions. We'll try and answer them as we go along, but any questions we don't get the chance to answer either during the webinar or at the end, we will contact you afterwards with answers to those. So we're going to look at what is DORA, what are the requirements, what's governance around that and how that's enforced, and then do exactly the same for NIS 2. We're going to look at the similarities and differences between them, and then we're really going to look at how having ISO 27001 enables you to integrate those, where there's overlap, where there's areas you need to work on. And to finish off, we're going to focus specifically on the implications for UK organisations and future developments, because it's quite a fast-changing landscape and there's a lot going on at the moment. So that's what we're going to cover today. For those of you that aren't familiar with URM, I will just give you a very brief overview. So URM's been established for over 20 years. We're part of Cooper Parry, so we're a wide-ranging professional services organisation. From a URM perspective, we combine your traditional GRC, governance, risk and compliance. So within that, 27001, NIS 2, DORA, PCI, GDPR, all of those areas, alongside a cyber practice around penetration testing, cyber essentials, and bring the two of those together to give you an overarching solution, which is particularly relevant to today with some of the DORA NIS 2 requirements. We have a passionate team of individuals who've sat where you are today, probably internally thinking, how do I implement them? Is it relevant to me? And also as consultants, of which Chris is one. Chris has, I won't try to age you, Chris, here we go. Over 15 years information security experience, and around that 30 years of IT experience, which I think is becoming more relevant, Chris, with some of the more technical requirements that are coming out. Chris has got, as well as DORA and NIS 2, which he's been involved with, his background includes SOC 2, 27001 and PCI. Holds the great titles of CISA, CISM, and is a QSA. Yep. So brings a lot of experience to this. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. We appreciate you being here today. So if we go back to basics, I guess, and we'll start with DORA, and then we'll go on to NIS 2. So if we start real back to basics, what is DORA?
Yeah, so essentially DORA is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's an EU act. It's a sector-specific act, so it relates to the financial sector and obviously financial institutions. And the sort of background to it is that traditionally financial institutions have been good at managing essentially their commercial resilience, or at least about the perception that they've been good at managing their commercial resilience. So for things like ensuring that they've got appropriate liquidity, ensuring that they spread the risk of their financial holdings. What the EU has recognised is that perhaps they haven't been quite as diligent, or at least as structured in their management of digital operational resilience.
And I guess, was it yesterday or Monday, and whichever day this week, probably the Amazon or AWS outage, down, whatever we want to term it, it's probably a really good example of this, and couldn't have been more timely for us today.
Yeah, it's a brilliant example. And funny enough, when it happened, I was thinking this is really, perhaps not for Lloyd's customers and Snapchat customers, but I was thinking for the purposes of the webinar, quite good timing. It's a classic, one of the classic concerns within the EU is that for its financial sector, there is a level of risk associated with not just the financial institutions and their digital resilience, but also the resilience down the supply chain. And again, this essentially is what DORA is looking at. It's not just looking at, it's centered on the digital resilience of the financial institutions, but built into that is the fact that there's a focus on the resilience of the supply chain as well. And obviously the EU is particularly concerned around the fact that fundamentally there's like two scenarios. A single financial institution could suffer a breach, and then that breach spread across the financial sector, or a critical service provider could suffer a breach, and that caused a huge issue across the financial sector. So it's not just concerned in the issues of individual financial institutions, it's also on the impact across the whole financial sector, be that within a particular EU state or indeed across the whole EU.
Got it. Okay, so hence why Monday's outage shows exactly what that concern is and why.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't take much to imagine, and let's just use Lloyd's as the example because I'm aware that did have an impact on them. The impact, I mean, if you were affected by it, would have been very annoying, but it was just a number of hours, it wasn't days. And also it just seemed to be Lloyd's, Bank of Scotland and the subsidiaries. It wasn't spread across multiple banks. So you can imagine an instance where either Lloyd's suffered this issue, or AWS suffered the issue which impacted Lloyd's for days, or you have that hours outage, but it was across all banks in the UK.
Yeah,
it's that type of area that DORA is looking to protect the financial sector from, and we'll see how that works as we drill down into it.
Got you. Okay. So it's financial institutions only and their supply chain.
Yeah, let's initially just keep it as financial institutions. We'll come on to exactly what the supply chain piece is in a second. And although there are some exclusions, it's essentially all financial institutions across the EU. If you're a micro organisation, financial institution, you're still expected to be compliant. They've got some simplified risk framework requirements, and there's also some specific niche areas of finance where there's some exclusions as well. But the way to look at it is fundamentally it's all institutions that are undertaking financial activities within the EU.
And if you're a third party, like a managed service provider, a hosting provider, any description, it will apply to you if, assuming any of your clients fall within this bracket, you are part of that supply chain.
Yes and no. I will tell you what I call my consultants answer. It depends. We will come on to that. It is actually very clear what that is, but we'll come on to that as we get to that specific aspect. DORA, like a lot of the EU acts, follows the principle of proportionality, which is good in some respects. It's slightly frustrating in others, in that it says this is what you need to do. You need to decide exactly how you do it. So in terms of your cyber defences, it basically says there's a principle of proportionality. You need to look at the level of risk you've got, your size of your organisation, and the type of services you're delivering and the type of customers you have to determine exactly what controls you have in place.
And we're going to come on to how you demonstrate this, aren't we? Okay. And so it's effective from January this year, although came into force 2 years ago. So it's been a 2-year opportunity to.
Yes, and the key aspect to remember with DORA is not only is it sector specific, is also that it's a regulation. So this isn't an EU act that member states can decide how they're going to apply it, or can put their own layer around it. It's very specific, and it says this is what you have to do, which is, compared to some EU acts, it's why DORA has been implemented
so quickly.
Quite so quickly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. Okay, so how is it enforced? Because I know this is, as a regulation, does each state have its own regulator? Does it, for us, is it an FCA thing? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, in practice, and sorry, just to take a step back, again, with all EU acts, there's typically the concept of a competent authority.
Yeah.
Competent authority is a state-based, typically an EU state-based organisation that fundamentally has responsibilities for overseeing and enforcing the standard.
So in the UK, so if I took data protection, is that like the ICO in the UK?
But yes, exactly.
Right,
and
okay.
in actual fact, with DORA, because it's financial sector specific, in actual fact, the competent authorities are really those authorities within each country that are specifically responsible for managing the insurance sector, the credit sector, the banking sector. And within DORA, there's, when it articulates what the competent authorities are, it basically says for each subsector of the financial sector, these are the organisations that are going to be the competent authorities. And because it's an EU act, it will point to other EU acts which specify who the competent authorities are. So the long and the short of it is if you're under the scope of DORA, the competent authority that's going to be enforcing it is probably the authority that you've had to register with to be able to do your specific business in the EU.
Got it. And then they're responsible, the competent authority, for you complying with DORA. And if you don't comply appropriately, sanctions, fines, etc.
Yeah. I mean, the impression I get around this is again, because it's sector specific, what they're going to be looking to do is advise and direct and assist organisations to actually get to compliance, rather than going full on with fines and things straight away. It's in everybody's best interests to go on a journey around this.
And in our experience, most organisations that come within the scope in terms of as a client have probably been contacted by their supervisory authority. What we're seeing more of, aren't we, is that starting to cascade down the supply chain with, say, take your Lloyd's example, Halifax at the start. Lloyd's have probably been contacted, have probably been doing a lot of work towards this. They're now starting to go to their supply chain on the basis, either you're a critical ICT provider or whatever the category is, you've, as far as we're concerned, you fall under DORA and you should be compliant.
Not exactly, it is absolutely that principle. And again, if you're a financial institution, the authority in a financial institution that's doing financial activities in the EU, it will be whoever you've been registered with and are authorised by, who would have come to you. So in effect, I mean, I'm sure there's little niches where this hasn't completely occurred, but fundamentally it's been a relatively straightforward process. It's quite black and white who needs to, what financial institutions need to be compliant or not. In terms of, and because you keep asking questions, we'll definitely drill into this a little bit now. In terms, and it is one of the areas that is a little bit confusing. If you're a service provider to in-scope financial institutions, there's nothing in DORA that explicitly says you have to be compliant to DORA.
Got it.
The bottom bullet point on this slide, which talks about European supervisory authorities, as the clue suggests, these are authorities that have across the EU financial responsibilities, and they are responsible for essentially looking at, I'm going to say looking at all of the service providers that are being utilised by financial institutions, and determining which ones are essential to the financial sector. But this will make a little bit more sense when we dive down into it a little bit more in a second. But essentially, going back to that first point that I said about DORA, it's not concerned with service providers that are providing a particular service to half a dozen financial institutions across the EU. It's really looking at those ones that could cause a cross financial sector and cross country impact. So, surprise, surprise, your AWSs, your Microsofts, your Googles, and if we go out of that space, it will be data center providers, particularly organisations that have got data centers across multiple EU states, and hence they're providing that service to multiple financial institutions. Got you.
Okay, so diving down into it, what are effectively the requirements, or how do they stack up?
The important thing, and including the title with DORA, is it's about operational resilience. So essentially, it's looking digital operational resilience. Even it's about having a framework that relates to that. And basically, it's got five core pillars. There's risk management and governance. As with all of these things, we've already mentioned the principle of proportionality. What you deliver in terms of the governance and some of your controls to prevent or alert you about information security ICT incidents should be risk-based and should be based on that principle of proportionality. So that's what that risk management and governance piece is saying. It's saying you need to do this on a risk basis. You need to understand what your resilience risks are, and you need to have a structured way of managing them and managing the controls, processes, policies that you put in place to do all of that. And then there's a pillar that talks about incident reporting. Now, DORA, as I said at the start, is a regulation. So for some of these pillars, it goes into a lot of detail, and incident reporting is one of them. Now, and it does that because essentially the EU wants to be confident that financial institutions are going to report into the competent authorities details about critical incidents as quickly as possible. So to just give you a snapshot of the level of detail it goes down to, it specifies that how quickly you need to initially alert your competent authority about the incident, how frequently you need to update them, and what you need to do at the end. And in actual fact, it produces templates that detail the type of information you need to deliver for that. So that gives an indication of the level of detail that it goes down into. Likewise, the operational resilience testing piece. I mean, it's not going to surprise you. With resiliency, there is an expectation that you're testing the stuff that you put in place. Again, it goes down into a lot of detail about exactly how you should be doing that testing.
And one question, which is probably stupid, and I maybe should have asked you this earlier. By digital, it's talking effectively about the online presence, or is it talking about all data held in systems? But it's fundamentally meaning your online presence.
It's talking about ICT, so it's talking about all of your technology. So if you're online present, but also the technology that could be supporting, if they've still got banks on the high street in the EU, but supporting that as well. So the resilience testing piece goes into a lot of detail similar to the incident reporting piece. Third-party risk management. Again, we've talked about the fact that DORA is keen to understand who those critical third parties are. So basically, that means within DORA, financial institutions have to provide an awful lot of detail about the service providers that they're utilising in the digital space, and whether they're essential, and whether they're using them just in one aspect of their organisation or in multiple sort of sub-organisations within their group or whatever. And that's important because essentially the EU, the ESAs that we saw on the previous slide, their role as overseers of third-party suppliers, third-party service providers, they need to understand what that looks like. They need to understand what the level of risk is. So they need to understand exactly what AWS is doing, what Microsoft is doing, what Google is doing in these spaces. So again, there's an awful lot of detail in DORA about how financial institutions need to document their suppliers, and there's a consistency around that, how that's done, so it can be supplied to the ESAs, who can then determine who the critical suppliers are.
And then finally, there's the
information sharing is one that they've classed as optional. It's the one around trying to ensure that across the financial sector, the financial institutions are sharing pertinent data. And they're doing that. They're not doing that via WhatsApp or anything. They're doing that via a structured, it being the EU, structured committees and the like.
Got it. Okay. And just to wrap up the DORA requirements, there is a lot of detail available, isn't it? This is not vague. Although it's proportional, there is detail about expectations. And this is an important aspect of it. You've got the DORA Act, which is a set of articles. Now supporting that, and within the Act, when you get to specific articles, it will say there is additional supporting information. There is a set of RTSs and ITSs, so you can see regulatory and implemented technical standards. And it's not going to surprise you, these are particularly in the areas of incident reporting, supplier management, and testing of your resilience piece. And these RTSs and ITSs go down to a level of specifying how you determine whether your incident is critical or not. As I've already mentioned, exactly how you should be reporting that incident to your competent authority. And for third-party management, there is I can't remember if it's an ITS or an RTS, but one that actually says these are the clauses you should have in your supplier contracts. So very detailed, and this is how you need to document your third-party suppliers so you can provide it to the ESAs. Got it. Okay, so high level, and I appreciate we could discuss this at significant length. That's DORA. So same, I guess, approach to NIS 2. What's NIS 2? So the Network and Information Security Directive, NIS, has been in place since 2016. So essentially, it sets a set of, and it's a good how it's been worded on this slide, cybersecurity obligations for critical infrastructure organisations. So it's very much in that critical infrastructure space and ensuring that appropriate cybersecurity controls are in place. As this slide shows, it was introduced in 2016. There was a fundamental challenge with it in that the EU states, I'm going to say the EU states didn't really do anything about it. That's unfair. What they did wasn't particularly structured and certainly wasn't particularly consistent. So NIS 2 was brought in 2023. It didn't really change the fundamental cybersecurity obligations. What it did do was change and provide a huge amount more detail about how it should be enforced, the structure of that enforcement, and also it expanded the scope of NIS 2. Okay, right. No, that makes sense. Okay, and it's now separated in organisations as well. That it applies to, didn't it? Because was it NIS 2 originally critical national infrastructure? Is that sort of where where it was aiming initially?
And in truth, I don't actually know exactly how the original NIS determined that, but with NIS 2, what it's done is it's split the in-scope entities into essential and important, and that's based on, perhaps unsurprisingly, the sector that you're operating in. They've listed two groups of business sectors. One they've classed very critical, one they classed critical. So in your very critical one, it's stuff like transport infrastructure, air carriers, energy distributors, providers, all of those types types of organisations. In the IT space, organisations that essentially provide the backbone of your technology, comms network and the like. And then they've got important entities. And that's, I mean, the examples I can immediately think of are like food production, distribution.
Okay.
And then within the IT space, providers of social networks, providers of online marketplaces, those types of organisation. And then there is also a dimension which is based on size of organisation.
Yeah.
So to determine whether you're essential or important, you take that matrix of, well, what sector are you operating in and how big are you?
Okay, and the difference being, if you're essential, you've got proactive supervision, including auditing and reporting. Yeah. If you're important, it's more reactive. Okay.
Yeah. So in practice, with important entities, you're expected to be compliant, but they're only going to, the competent authorities, surprise, surprise, are only going to be coming in there if they think there's an issue or you've had an incident. So it is very much a reactive piece. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And the requirements are, as before we said, it was more proportional. This is slightly different, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, again, the NIS 2 has the principle of proportionality, but it's a directive rather than a regulation. So essentially, the NIS 2 requirements are a relatively high level, but the key thing is that they cover all aspects. So they're not just focusing in on technology, they're also looking at how physical environment, physical security could impact your cybersecurity, how people could impact your cybersecurity.
Got it. And the requirements broadly fall into the areas on the slide.
Yes, yeah. And now the interesting thing, use that word advisedly, but the interesting thing about NIS 2 is if you actually look at the actual act, there's very little about what the requirements are on the entities. Pretty much it's this list.
Right.
There's some additional information again about how information cybersecurity incidents should be reported to competent authorities, but really it basically says if you're in scope of NIS 2, you need to have these things in place, and you need to be following the principle of proportionality when you are implementing them.
Which then brings up the questions then, how do you know what's expected of you and what you need to do within those areas?
Yeah. Again, this is an EU directive, so basically it's given to the EU states. The EU states then need to determine how they're going to implement it in law in their particular countries.
Yeah.
And so when they're doing that, they can make a decision fundamentally about what good looks like in terms of, let's use the example of, in terms of ISO 27001 certification.
Yeah.
So it's down to them to determine what their criteria are going to be to assess compliance.
And is it fair to say some competent authorities are further ahead than others? And it's very, I guess the really important message is, wherever you are delivering services, trading, whatever, you need to understand what that competent authority's requirements are specifically. What if you're multiple?
Yeah. So the principle here, and just to take a slight step back, you can see the difference between this and DORA. DORA is sector specific. The competent authorities are the authorities that already have responsibility in those specific sectors. So, and DORA is very specific. So absolutely driven, and it's been implemented in EU terms relatively quickly. With NIS 2, because essentially member states need to implement it into law in their countries, it's taken a while, and I mean, you only need to scan through on the internet and you can see that countries like France and Holland and and Belgium, I mean,
Yeah.
Belgium has probably progressed it more, are still in the progress of actually getting to the point of implementing it into law. But to answer your question, if you're working across multiple EU states, so you're providing critical infrastructure across multiple mobile states, you need to define what your core, your home state is.
Oh, and it'd be the home state's
The home state's responsibility,
will
yes,
be responsible
is then responsible for driving it forward. And that isn't just you roll a dice or you pick the state that's got the lowest, appears to have the lowest threshold. It's based on size of the organisation. Typically, it's based on where you put your HQ.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so there must, from how you've been speaking, there's clearly a level of overlap, although they do focus on arguably different entities, but they must apply they must apply to the same one in many examples.
If we're talking about organisations that deliver critical infrastructure and organisations that are in the financial sector, there is an overlap of a subset of those organisations where the both acts apply to them. I think when you look at the relationship between DORA and NIS2, and specifically what NIS2 says about sector-specific requirements, it articulates the difference between the two standards, one being very specific, one being a bit more high level. Because essentially what NIS2 says is if you're an organisation whereby there's sector-specific EU requirements that you have to fulfil, DORA is only one example of that. There are lots of other sector-specific security directives or acts. Then you follow your sector-specific ones, providing, and almost invariably they will be, they're they're higher level, they're more detailed, they're more stringent is the word I was striving for there, sorry. They're more stringent than the NIS2 requirements.
Okay, but if you don't have sector-specific, then NIS2 applies.
NIS2 applies, and also if like for example with DORA, it only covers a subset of what NIS2 covers. So NIS2 covers HR security, DORA doesn't. You would still, if you have to be compliant to both, you would still have to fulfil the NIS2 requirements around HR security.
Which I suppose lends us to comparison between the two.
Yeah.
So as you've said, NIS2 is directive, whereas DORA is very specifically a regulation with that detail. Okay.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I think we've probably covered pretty much everything on this slide, and hopefully put across the difference between the two in the level of detail that is there, and how specific DORA is compared to NIS2.
And as you've said a number of occasions, NIS2 is more about how your competent authority is going to then enact that into law, which then will probably give you more detail.
Yes, exactly.
But overall, the approach to governance enforcement is very similar.
And broadly, the principle of the competent authorities is with DORA, within a particular EU state, there's likely to be multiple competent authorities because there will be those different subsectors of the financial sector. With NIS2, typically there will be one, and it will be like cyber security, your national cyber security sector, or its equivalent.
Okay, so which brings us to so we've got DORA and NIS, we've got a good understanding of what that looks like, but I suppose it comes to, which is where we started when we started talking about this webinar, where does 27001 come in? Where does it overlap? Does it help? And should you use it as your foundation? I guess is kind of a very rough summary.
Yeah. And the answer fundamentally is that ISO 27001, I'm sure as pretty much everybody on the call would expect, provides a really strong foundation in that it basically gives you your information management system. It gives you the way of governing how you're managing your security controls, for want of a better word. But with DORA, as we keep saying, there's some very specific requirements. So if you've got an established ISMS, ISO 27001 ISMS in place, you're going to need to look at DORA and understand exactly what the specific DORA requirements are.
Yeah.
Again, not wanting to harp on the same thing, but around information, critical information breach, security incidents, and how you're reporting those, exactly how you should be documenting your relationships with your third-party service providers, exactly what you should be doing around resilience testing. So ISO 27001 will give you that fundamental foundation, but DORA has got lots of specific stuff that you need to be aware of. There's also a little bit of a difference in focus in that, including the title with DORA, it's operational resilience, whereas ISO 27001 is information security. So there's aspects of 27001 which aren't particularly applicable to DORA, and then obviously DORA again drills into lots of detail about the things that are absolutely applicable to operational resilience. So it gives you the foundation, but it is the foundation. You then need to add your DORA compliant layers over the top of the policies and processes and procedures that you've got in place.
No, that makes sense. And that's what we've seen a number of clients do, haven't we? Taken 27001 and then added around those areas. Okay. From a NIS2 perspective? Yeah.
With NIS2, the first bullet point, rather than saying it provides a strong foundation, I've said it provides a very strong foundation. Again, NIS2 is a bit about the resilience and about reporting. There's still specific detail within NIS2 that isn't particularly covered by 27001, and again, that's around things like incident reporting. There's some very specific stuff around ensuring that your access management processes, you've got multi-factor authentication in place. They're quite specific there. But fundamentally, ISO 20, if you're compliant to ISO 27001, you are meeting most of the generic bullet points that NIS2 requires. Because again, as I said earlier, when you look at NIS2, there's a relatively small number of articles that actually reference what you as an organisation need to be doing in this space.
And it's fair to say NIS2 is much more control focused as well, isn't it? So if you've decided some controls aren't applicable, just be aware. And NIS2 might say, no, they are applicable for the
I mean, it's still risk-based. So there's still that aspect, and there's the aspect of proportionality. But as it says in that last bullet point, you need to be clear about what your specific home EU state has put in place around its expectations for NIS2 as well. So it could have taken the NIS2 high-level bullets and basically said, okay, for I don't know, HR security, we're expecting you to do this level of screening or this or that. So so you need to be aware of that. But essentially, ISO 27001 does provide you with that very strong foundation, as the slide says.
And I'm slightly nervous about asking you this question because it could be quite a long answer, but we need to be quite sure. So kind of this comes into, how do I read? Someone's asked, well, then how do I read the European legislation? So if there's a piece of legislation, it's like, read it on. How do I kind of go about reading that to define what the requirements are?
As is the case with everything in modern life, if you go onto the internet and ask a question about NIS2 or DORA, you'll get generally quite a good answer, but there will be potentially some inaccuracies there. And fundamentally, I think all organisations that believe that they do need to be doing something in this space should go to the original, the EU Act to review it, which can be slightly daunting when you first look at them because they're big old legal type documents. But the thing to remember is the only thing that you as an end user organisation are interested in are the articles. So you can jump through, I'm going to say all the flim flam at the start, but you can jump through like all of the information about the history and the justifications for why they've done what they do, and get down to the articles. And then when you get down to the articles, you only need to be aware of the ones that are specific to you as an entity.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to look at the competent authority responsibilities or the I mean, with DORA, there's the overseeing responsibilities across. So essentially, it's concentrate on the articles. The articles, certainly the first 3 or 4 articles, always have the same structure. They talk about scope, they talk about definitions, they talk about the principle of what the Act is. So get down to that bit and then read through and stop when it gets to the bit where it starts to talk about competent authorities and the like. And that gives you, I mean, because they're legal acts, there is a tendency for them to refer to other acts and things like that. So that does make it a little bit complicated. But other than that, it typically is relatively straightforward for you to read through it.
Okay.
So I would recommend that you should so that you can take you can have your own take on what it's saying, and you're not relying on the multiple levels of filtering that may be some of the stuff that comes up when you query.
So this brings us probably to the key question. As you know, the vast majority of organisations on the webinar today are UK organisations, and clearly it's European legislation, and we are the UK, not within Europe. So I suppose, what are the implications for UK organisations, and what's the roadmap? Where's it going?
And I guess the best way of answering this is short and with some bullet points around this. For DORA, if you're providing financial services in the EU, directly doing that, then whoever you've been authorised by, certified by, they are the ones that are going to be coming to you and saying you need to be DORA compliant.
Okay, so I could be, if I'm in the UK, I've probably got the FCA or somebody that's the UK, but I've equally probably got somebody in Spain, somebody in France, etc. And it's those that are going to be coming to me. Okay.
So if you're a service provider to a financial institution that's delivering financial services in the EU, it's down to the financial institution to determine what level of control they require from you. Unless you're in a situation where you're going to be seen as a critical service provider, which typically means either you're providing a huge range of critical services to a big financial institution, or you're providing services to multiple financial institutions across the EU. Other than that, it's down to the financial institution to determine what they want to see from you.
Got it.
Now, DORA obviously provides a fair amount of detail about what the expectations are around that, but it doesn't anywhere say that all service providers need to be compliant to all of the requirements of DORA. As a business, you obviously need to make a decision about whether it would be useful for you to be in that space.
Competitive advantage.
Exactly.
Okay. From a NIS2 perspective?
One of the, I believe possibly one of the reasons why NIS2 has been a slower process to go into law in European countries is the fact that not only do we have to create the laws, they also have to determine who are the providers of critical infrastructure in their particular state. So again, that is a process that is driven by the state, but I think there's a little bit of stuff that organisations, if they know that they're involved in or are going to be involved in some sort of critical infrastructure, they need to be talking to the authorities. The authorities are around that. And as we've talked about already, if you're providing critical infrastructure, critical services across the EU, then the expectation is that you work with the particular competent authorities in a particular state to say, right, this is our home state. There isn't an expectation for you to sign up to half a dozen or a dozen different competent authorities across the EU states.
Okay, that makes sense. So what is, I suppose, what is the UK equivalent to DORA?
So Bank of England, FSA, and I think some other UK-based authorities have produced an operational resilience framework. Now that framework is principle and is more principle and good practice based, rather than being a definitive legal requirement. Obviously, the Bank of England and FSA are pushing organisations to put the appropriate operational resilience in place. There are plans to develop some UK legislation which will be similar to DORA, and your expectations would be that it would cover the same sort of things. It would be trying to get its head around who the critical service providers are to the UK financial sector. It would want to be understanding. It would want to be putting in a very formalised and structured method of reporting critical ICT information breaches to, I don't know, the FSA or the Bank of England or whoever, so that they can coordinate and have visibility of everything. So yeah, the expectation is they will put something that's very similar to DORA in place. And
from a NIS2 perspective?
Yeah, well, when the UK was still in the EU, it had a requirement to implement NIS regulations into law, so it did do that. Then as NIS 2 fired up, certainly, I mean, what I saw was that there weren't really any expectations that the UK would follow the NIS 2 journey. It basically stay with its existing regulations. That's changed, and they are looking to create, as it says here, a cybersecurity and resilience bill, which certainly, I mean, there's online, you can see that the minister responsible has talked about it, has positioned there in quite a lot of detail, and it looks like it's going into Parliament to be discussed end of the year, start of next year. So, and this isn't going to surprise anybody, but fundamentally, it's going to follow the NIS2 type approach of it's going to expand its scope in terms of what's defined as very critical and critical services. It's going to enforce the requirements a bit more strictly, and potentially it might add some additional technical requirements. But fundamentally, it's that thing of scope and enforcement, I think. So following the path of these two.
Yeah, and so we've got a couple of questions coming. So we've got quite a few questions. How does DORA and NIS2 compare to the new UK government cyber resilience framework released this month? I'm assuming there's elements of it that absolutely apply, but it's not. It's not a replacement for.
No, and fundamentally, it's more applicable to the DORA space. But I mean, I'm sure lots of people on the call know, with operational resilience, there's lots of organisations that are putting forward approaches to operational resilience, but they all cover fundamentally the same areas. It's around protecting yourself. It's around making sure that you've got incident management in place. It's about testing. It's about understanding what your exposure is with your third parties, really. So yeah, it's always going to be in the same space. Obviously, I have a stuck record. DORA has very, very specific requirements in it, and any new frameworks that are coming along will have their own specific requirements around incident reporting, around resilience testing, and the like.
We've been asked, if you're 27001 compliant, are there any documents or templates to help us move towards DORA and NIS2? That would be lovely, wouldn't it, if there was? And I guess a lot of it is going to be, NIS2 specifically, will be country specific.
I mean, there absolutely are mapping documents out there, which basically, I mean, again, for NIS2, as I said previously, with NIS2, there's relatively few articles which are applicable to to end user organizations, but there are absolutely mappings out there which take ISO 27001 controls and map them to bullet points within Article 21, I think it is, which has got the, I might have got that wrong, but
we won't hold you to it.
No, it's one of the 20s.
Yeah.
That has a bullet points that says this is what needs to be in your framework. So there's absolutely mapping around that. And DORA, there's mapping, especially around what's required for your risk and governance framework.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, then when you get down to incident reporting, supplier management, and to a degree testing, it's not difficult to work out which ISO 27001 controls are applicable to those spaces. But a long answer, the short answer is yes, there are.
Okay. And if you could give one piece of advice to organisations starting their, let's start with DORA and then we're doing this to journey, what would that be?
With DORA, it's going to sound a bit circular, but it's understanding what the specific requirements are related to supplier management, testing, and incident reporting. They're the three areas where there's very specific reporting. And I think the other aspect is you need to understand why you're doing this. So as I said, DORA doesn't explicitly state that you as a standard service provider have to be compliant to DORA.
Yeah.
We talked with some of our clients, a theme for that commercial differentiator, the market differentiator. And so I think understanding at a high level how your existing incident management, supplier management, and resilience testing, business continuity, disaster recovery testing processes match up to the requirements of DORA would be key.
Okay. And from a NIS2 perspective?
A NIS2, there's a couple of gotchas in NIS2 where it is quite specific about a couple of areas. Like we said, multi-factor authentication is one of them, and then instant reporting is the other. So making sure that you understand what those are and how compliant you are as an organisation. Yeah. And again, as I said previously, although this might be slightly painful, you should really have a look at the acts yourself, just so that even if most of the time you're going to be going to other online resources for this, just so that you can see how that online advice actually links through to the specifics of the acts.
Someone's asked, what's the level of emphasis on application security in these standards, or is there a particular emphasis on application security?
In this too, there is that requirement, which is very similar to the group, the 27001 controls around the implementation, the deployment, the maintenance of applications. With DORA, because it's more resilience based. It's less specific around that. What you do need to understand around applications of things is how they relate to the resilience of your services. Yeah. So that's a key aspect, and that comes back to that whole concept of the risk framework and the governance. Yeah. But in terms of drilling down to the specific security features of specific applications, it doesn't really get down into that.
Okay. This might be a depends one. For a multinational organisation headquartered in the US but operating through multiple subsidiaries within the EU, how do the jurisdictional rules under DORA and NIS2 directive apply? So, for example, does compliance fall under the EU member state where the company's main establishment is located, or do obligations apply separately in each member state where subsidiaries operate? And I guess part of this is going to come down to, are they separate legal entities, etc., isn't it? It's not a...
Yeah. Broadly with NIS2, at a high level, you determine a host EU state, and as I said, you can't do that by rolling a dice. You need to be able to justify why. Yeah. And that could be as simple as, where's your biggest footprint?
Yeah.
With DORA, again, it's sector specific, so it's more driven by exactly what services you're delivering in particular states.
Okay. And final question: if our home country is in the UK, but we operate in multiple EU countries, would you recommend looking at NIS 2 certification, or here we've got NIS 2018?
I don't understand. There isn't a concept of
there's no certification.
Certification. And again, it comes down to what is your organisation's role in delivering critical infrastructure, basically. And so if you're moving into a particular, I don't know, project to build transportation links or manage transportation links or whatever, then as you go through that process, the expectation would be that the relevant competent authority within that state would be coming to you and asking questions.
So it's more about looking at where you're going to be working, operating, and no, that makes sense. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Just to close off, often when we run these webinars, people are like, that was really beneficial, but where do I start? So from this, we're offering a 2-3 hour readiness workshop, DORA or NIS 2, to look at your own position, your organisation's position, and give you some tailored guidance. There'll be a summary report, 2-page report specific to your organisation. If this is of interest, can you register that on your feedback form? And can we please ask that you fill in your feedback forms? If there's any questions we haven't addressed, we'll follow up on those. If you'd like a copy of the slides or a recording of the webinar, again, could you please put that on your feedback form? And if there's a subject that's of interest to you that you'd like to see us cover in future webinars, again, if you could please put that on your feedback form. Upcoming events, relevant to 27001, we have a How to Achieve 27001 certification on the 12th of November. And again, building on many of the topics we've had today, we're looking at building cyber resilience. This is going to look at practical steps for reducing the likelihood and impact of a breach, and we'll focus on some of the areas we've discussed today. This is coming at it from a higher non-technical level, but really is looking at what are the key things you should be considering in terms of building cyber resilience. And then towards the end of November, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, certification success and ongoing compliance. Certainly the new question set that's becoming now way more established and is the only one that you can be considering, has brought in some new steps around scoping, technical scope verification, testing, and what that looks like. And it's probably important really to be aware of those. And now we've been running with this for a number of months, what that actually looks like. So the feedback form is available at the end of the webinar that we would please ask you to complete. Thank you very much indeed for attending. And if you have got any follow-up questions, please do reach out to us.